Hello, fifth grade. Today we're going to talk about the Jamestown colony. So similar to what we did in our last lesson, talking about Roanoke, we're going to go through the reading and then we're going to complete our packet in chapter 6 about Jamestown, kind of go through some sensory words about what a settler kind of went through, felt, and also pay attention to our vocabulary for this chapter. So, Jamestown Colony. In 1606, England was ruled by King James I. English people did not choose him as their leader because England was a monarchy, a government in which the ruler inherits his or her power. During this time, King James I gave a group of wealthy men permission to start a colony in North America. The group sent 105 men to settle in Virginia. They hoped a colony would make them richer. The settlers arrived in Virginia in May 1607, hoping to find gold. They chose a place near a river where the deep waters allowed them to anchor their ships close by. The site was upriver from Chesapeake Bay, but far enough from the river that Spanish ships could not easily attack the settlement. Located on a peninsula, the town would be easily defended by land. The group built a settlement enclosed by the walls of a fort and named it Jamestown in honor of King James I. Unfortunately, the settlers built Jamestown on a marsh. The waters around the town was dirty and salty, and the land was bad for farming. Worse still, mosquitoes in the marsh carried a deadly disease called malaria. By the end of 1607, disease and other hardships had killed many of the settlers. In late 1607, some American Indians captured a Jamestown settler named Captain John Smith. They took him to their chief, Powhatan. According to the story, Smith later told the chief was about to kill him when Powhatan's young daughter, Pocahontas, saved his life. Many historians, however, think that Smith's life was never in real danger. After the incident, Pocahontas visited Jamestown several times. She and her people brought food to trade and to the few surviving colonists. In January 1608, more men arrived from England. Many had come to seek gold. So there were not enough people growing the food needed to feed the colony. In September, John Smith became the leader of the colony. He knew that the settlement needed everyone's help to survive. He said that any man who would not work to maintain Jamestown would not eat. Smith's leadership helped save the colony. In the summer of 1609, a new group of settlers arrived, including women and children. The next month, Smith returned to England after having been badly burned by an explosion of gunpowder. The colonists had lost a strong leader. To make matters worse, Powhatan stopped trading with them. Local tribes attacked the people they found outside the settlement. The winter of 1609-1610 was known as the starving time. Many settlers had to eat horses and dogs. Hundreds of people died. Only about 60 settlers survived in Jamestown. The Jamestown settlers never found gold. Therefore, they needed another way to support their colony. Colonist John Rolfe learned how to grow a new kind of tobacco. The settlers planted this cash crop. In 1614, they began to trade their tobacco for money and supplies. People in England loved it. Tobacco became Virginia's gold. Meanwhile, Powhatan's people worried about how many settlers were coming to their land. In 1614, John Rolfe married Pocahontas. For a time, the colonists and the American natives were at peace. Pocahontas even went to England and met King James. Before she could return, she got sick in 1617 and she died. Meanwhile, Jamestown was growing and changing. In 1619, the men elected representatives to make laws for the colony. This was the first represented government in the American colonies. The people chose their leaders in this government. They called the governing body the House of Burgesses. Burgess, an English word for an elective representative. Only landowners could have this job. But now Virginia's government was more democratic than England's, right? Because it was based on representatives, and the representatives were able to speak for their people and decide on decisions, versus in England where the king made the decisions. When Powhatan died, his brother became chief, and the peace between the American natives and the settlers ended. In 1622, the new chief and his men attacked Jamestown and killed 347 colonists, but Jamestown survived to become the first successful English settlement in North America. And here's a few pictures. There's a picture of Pocahontas when she came to England for the first time. There's a picture of Jamestown being built. First they built tents and barricades. Palisades. As we read Blood on the River, we read about some of these details. Obviously, Blood on the River is elaborated, but a consensus of it is given here, where there were conflicts, there were times of peace, but there were also many issues they had with the natives. Now, if we were in class, I like to have not fun with this because it's not a fun situation, but to really think about the story of Pocahontas, think about what we know about it. Look at it. Let's watch the Disney movie of Pocahontas and see what happens and see how it's so changed in this myth of her and story of her and what she really was. In the story of Blood on the River, we actually read a lot about Pocahontas, and Samuel Collier actually will talk about his experiences with her, and as he goes with the different groups and learns about the natives. So let's go through and start with our vocabulary. There's a lot of vocabulary words that were in here. We have monarchy, Jamestown, colonists, representative government, democratic. All right, so we're going to go through and define all those words on the first page of our Chapter 6 packet. Okay, so going through our definitions for our vocabulary words. Democratic, relating to a form of government in which people have the power to rule themselves through elected representatives. That's a IVES, scribbled drabbled in there. Jamestown, the first permanent English colony in America, located in Virginia and named after King James I. Monarchy, form of government in which the ruler is or are a king and or a queen. Represented government, form of government where the citizens elect leaders to make decisions on their behalf. So we are a representative government. Our Congress, our leaders, and form a representative government. Okie doke, so let's move on and start talking about Jamestown. So our first question, why did people come to Jamestown? Well, people came because, what does it say? King James I gave a group of wealthy men permission to start a colony in North America, right? The Virginia Company of London. So the Virginia Company of London were a group of wealthy men who came to the colony. I don't highlight this. It's not highlighting, it's not working for me. So a group of wealthy men and women were given permission to start a colony in North America. Our next question says, what hardships did the people face when they first arrived? And if we remember, I think it says, unfortunately, right? There's our key word. Dun, dun, dun. Things don't sound so great when you hear the word unfortunately. They built Jamestown on a marsh, so it had salty water. There was no fresh water. It was bad for farming, and there were mosquitoes. If that was me during this time, I definitely would have died of malaria. Mosquitoes love me. So diseases and other hardships had killed many of the settlers. I think it also mentioned something about food and the lack of food. That was actually during the starving time, so that was a couple of years later. So we'll use this paragraph as our hardships paragraph. What mistakes did settlers make in the beginning that made survival even more difficult? So they anchored their area on a marsh, which means it was bad for farming. So I think one mistake would be that they didn't farm much. Some of this you can also kind of take from Blood on the River. We know that they looked for gold prior to making a place like a fort or barricades or places to live, and they were watering their plants and attempted crops with this marsh water, so the crops were all dying. Those are all clues we get from Blood on the River. So those are a few of our mistakes. Well, not our mistakes, their mistakes. How did the American natives in the area treat settlers when they first arrived? So this is a few sections, right? First, they said that they captured Captain John Smith. There was peace with the Powhatans, who brought food, and they traded with the colonists. So that's when they first arrived at the very beginning. What were some of the settlers' opinions of Captain John Smith? So it says that Captain John Smith eventually became the leader of the colony, and he was a strong leader who helped them survive, and he helped save the colony. How did life improve for the settlers after 1607? So after 1607, in 1609, and they're talking about improvement, so they don't want the starving time. So the 1607 was the first year. So what improved was that they were able to set up tobacco as a cash crop after the starving time. And then it says, how was Jamestown settlement successful? So even though they never found gold, they began to use tobacco as a cash crop, and it helped to fuel the trade in England. And if we keep going further through it, they say that they were able to set up a representative government within the colony, and there were times of peace with the natives. And we're just put some times of peace because it kind of went back and forth depending who was in charge of the tribe and the group. So next we're going to go through and fill out the colonial figure from the Jamestown colony and talk about what did they see or ate, what they do with their hands, how they listened, smelled, and felt. So our key words that we have for this section is marsh, Captain John Smith, Pocahontas, starving time, House of Burgesses, tobacco. All right, so we can go through. What can we see? Something we ate. All right, well, we can use the word starving time with the ate, right? I ate nothing during the starving time. With my hands, what did they do? They grew and farmed tobacco. Listen, right? We listened to Captain John Smith say, those who do not eat or those who do not work do not eat. Smell, you can smell a marsh and the saltiness and the dirt of the water when they first landed in Jamestown. What could they feel? Well, they could feel representative with the House of Burgesses and their government, and watched. Well, we haven't used Pocahontas, so you could watch Pocahontas interact with the colonies or watch Pocahontas come and bring food to trade with the natives, right? They had a better connection with the Powhatans based on with the connection of Pocahontas. All right, fifth grade. So this could be, please feel free to use these examples, come up with your own if you choose, making sure you just use all the words once for the word bank. Now, if we were in class, I'd love to compare and contrast the real stories of Pocahontas versus those that we know from like the Disney versions of the stories. But I found a fun, cute little synopsis of a true story of Pocahontas that I'm going to share with you. Give me 1 second. All right, and let's see, can I make this bigger? It is bigger. Okay, so let me play this. All right, here we go.
Early days of the New World colonies, these are the few facts that we think we know for sure about Pocahontas, though many of them became legends later on.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The true story of Pocahontas has never been known yet. But one thing we know for sure is that it's when two empires met. The first of these empires was the Powhatan tribe collection, 30 groups on coastal land under one big chief's direction. Far across the ocean, England's empire and King James sought gold from New World colonies like they saw coming out of Spain's. In May 1607, 100 British settlers landed, but what they called Jamestown, Virginia, was really Powhatan commanded. They battled with the Powhatans and tried to pan for gold, but they never found their riches, and soon they were starving and cold. Captain John Smith hoped the natives would trade them food for goods. He learned native words and customs, and he made maps of the woods. Without Smith's new friends, Jamestown would have died there by the water. And one of the nicest new friends was the big chief's little daughter. She was not yet 12 years old, but she often came to play and chat. Her nickname was Pocahontas, which meant happy little brat. Smith had to go back to England 'cause his leg got burned, and battles flared up with the natives when his back was turned. The Powhatans stopped bringing food, but this was a war they couldn't win, 'cause all those settlers kept dying, more and more kept shipping in. As for the young girl's whereabouts, for 4 years no one knew him. Some say she'd gotten married to a warrior named Cocoon. Then in 1613 the settlers learned where she was living. They kidnapped Pocahontas to see what ransom they'd be given. But the big chief had 100 kids, he didn't need her back again. So she stayed with Jamestown settlers, learning how to live like them. They renamed her Rebecca, and they were happy to baptize her. And when she married widower John Rolfe, peace came to both empires. Rolfe made Jamestown rich at last, but it wasn't gold he found. It was a sweet tobacco that he brought to Virginia's ground. They took a trip to London to advertise the new success. This friendly native made investors fear the New World less. Captain Smith chimed in and said, "This girl 9 years ago saved me from the natives. Was he lying? We don't know." This story became legendary, but might not be true. Captain John Smith wrote the same thing about other women too. Rebecca died before her journey home could sail away, but from the son she had with Rolfe, many descendants live today. For her kindness to the settlers, many myths about her grew. Her legend's grown 400 years, but she just lived to 22.
At Cutwater, we believe you should be able to take your cock.
All right, sorry about that. That was really weird. So, my friends, I hope you got a little information about Jamestown. We're going to read so much more about it in Blood on the River, some of it based on history, some of it, elaborated for historical fiction. Needless to say, I really hope you get a good piece of information about how Jamestown succeeded and how it was able to thrive. Have a good day.